Shalom everyone, hope everyone's doing well. B'ezrat Hashem, today in Masechet Sanhedrin we're going to learn Yud Zayin Amud Bet 17b. We're going to start at the two dots above the bottom of Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, about 7 or so lines from the bottom of Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. We're going to have 3 sections in today's learning. The first section will discuss the idea in the Mishnah that we had said you need 2 on the side of Chovah to tilt the court in the negative, liability. The second section will discuss certain qualifications that the judges had to have to be on the Sanhedrin, which seems to be both the 23 as well as the 71. And in the third section, Yud Zayin Amud Bet, we'll discuss certain terminologies used throughout the Gemara and which rabbis this particularly referred to. So the Gemara begins on Yud Zayin Amud Aleph at the 2 dots, Minayin Lavi Od Shlosha. So let's just remember, this is the reference to the end of the Mishnah, towards the end of the Mishnah, I should say. The Mishnah told us that, how do we know the Sanhedrin Ketana, means the lower capital courts have to be 23. So the Gemara said, because it says Eidah, which means you have to have, Eidah is 10. So you have to have 10 on the side of incrimination, and 10 on the side of validation. Sorry, I forgot to mention, our learning should be as a zechut for refuah shleima, a speedy recovery for Yaakov ben Dina. Back to the story here. The pasuk says Eidah. It says Eidah that you have to have 10 people on the court to incriminate, 10 people to validate, to make innocent. And then on top of that, we have psukim that seem extra, that imply, as the Mishnah deduced, actually, when it comes to incriminating, unlike when it comes to validating or making innocent, where even 1 is sufficient to tilt in the side of zchut, of innocence. When it comes to incriminating, meaning putting somebody to death, making somebody liable to capital punishment, you need 2. So based on that, the Mishnah said, we have to add another 3 because you can't have an equal number, so therefore you add another 3 onto the 20 that we've already established, and now you have a total of 23 on these lower capital courts. So the Gemara points out the obvious difficulty, which is, even if you added another 3, you won't have a scenario where there's 2 on the side of guilty over those on the side of innocent, meaning exactly 2. Because as the Gemara is about to speak out, if you have 23 judges, so either the breakdown is going to be 12 and 11, which you wouldn't be able to put a person to death, as we explained, or it'll be 13 and 10, in which case you don't have 2 on the side of guilty. So what's the scenario? You actually have 2 more on the side of guilty than the side of innocent that you could put someone to death, as we're deducing from the psukim. Now, I just want to point out, we could answer this and just say the psukim mean to say you need at least 2 more. So at least 2 more means 13 versus 10. But the Gemara understands that the Mishnah is dafka. It's saying if you add 2 more, or add 3 more, then you'll have a scenario where you could have 2 on the side of guilty. So what would be that scenario? So let's see that inside now. Minayin lavi od shlosha. Sof, says the Gemara, but at the end of the day, l'ra'al pishnayim lo mishkachat la. How do you find a scenario where you have 2 on the side of guilty and you could put this person to death? Because if 11 people say innocent and 12 say guilty, it's only 1 on the side of guilty and you wouldn't be allowed to put him to death. And if 10 say innocent and 13 say guilty, so that's a total of 3 on the side of guilty. So that wouldn't illustrate the case of our Mishnah that we're elaborating on. Rabbi Avo explains, either you could find this scenario in a court of 23 under the scenario of Mosifin. So Rashi explains, we'll learn more about this later. Very interesting. If you have a capital court of 23, 11 say innocent, 11 say guilty, and 1 says, I don't know. I don't know. He just says like that, I don't know. So the halacha is essentially that 1 abstains, and you have to add 2 more judges in place of that 1. So it'll come out now that you have 24. You have 24 judges on this court, because if you take 1 out of 23 and add 2 more, you'll have 24. In such a scenario, you could actually end up having 2 on the side of guilty over those who are saying innocent, in a scenario where it would be 13 to 11. That would actually end up being the scenario where you could have 2 on the side of guilty over the side of innocent. But that would be L'divrei Hakol. L'divrei Hakol means according to all of the Tanaim, because we have a machloket regarding the Sanhedrin Hagdolah, which is the greatest level of courts we've discussed already. The Rabbanan say 71, and Rabbi Yehuda says there are 70. But Uve Sanhedrin Hagdolah, regarding the great courts, as we just said, Va'alibed Rabbi Yehuda Da'amar Shiv'im. You could have a scenario without adding at all, where you'd have the position of Rabbi Yehuda holds that the great court of the Sanhedrin Hagdolah is 70 altogether. So if 36 said guilty and 34 said innocent, you'd have an illustration, according to Rabbi Yehuda, without even adding, where you could have 2 on the side of guilty, and it would sway the court's decision in terms of prosecuting. Okay. Now that we introduced this idea of Mosifin, Rabbi Avahu tells us a chidush about Mosifin. Rabbi Avahu, but Mosifin, when it comes to adding, again, in a scenario where one of the judges says, I don't know, so it's like a hung jury, meaning it's 11 versus 11, you have to add one more. So Mosifin, Osin Beit Din Shakul L'Katchila. Regarding Mosifin, you can even ideally make an even numbered court, i.e. it's going to be 24, right? Because again, if you detract 1, now it's 22. You add 2 more, now it's 24. So Gemara says Pshita, it's obvious, it's a Mishnah. We're going to learn this later, that when you remove 1, you add 2, and then 22 plus 2 is 24. So what's the chidush that Rabbi Avahu is teaching us? So Ma'odetema, you may have said, Aideka Amar Eni Odea. When the fellow says, I don't know, so he wants to abstain, so you might say, Kimande Ite Dami. You'll say, it doesn't mean that he is deleted from being part of the court. And therefore, V'i Amar Miltash Ma'inanle. Maybe if he changes his mind, and later on, he thinks of something that's logical that could sway the decision, his vote is still counted. So Kamash Malan, the chidush that Rabbi Avahu is saying is, when he says, I don't know, it's like he doesn't exist. He's removed. He's deleted from the court. And if he says, we don't listen to him. That's the chidush. It comes out to be an even number, because he does not remain making it 25. Rather, he's deleted, and now you have 24 when you add 2 more onto the 22 who remain from the original 23. Okay. Now, the Gemara tells us, Amar Rav Kahana, regarding this psak, very interesting psak actually. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but very interesting. So we know in order to put someone to death, meaning in a capital court, if there's 2 more, at least 2 more on the side of guilty, the litigant or the person in question will be put to death. However, before putting someone to death, they would sleep on it, meaning they would sleep overnight because maybe by tomorrow, somebody will come up with a reason that they should be innocent. In general, the Batei Dinim were very cautious about putting people to death. So if they could somehow validate that he's not Chayav Mitah, they would sleep overnight in order to somehow come up with something. And then if still tomorrow they wanted to put him to death, they didn't come up with any zchuyot, any innocence, they would. But Rav Kahana teaches very interesting chidush. Amar Rav Kahana, Sanhedri Shira'u Kulan Lechova. Imagine you have the entire court of 23, and they all think he's guilty. Not one person has any arguments in favor of this person's innocence. So in such a scenario, potrinoto, it's a little counterintuitive, you'll actually exonerate this person. You'll acquit him. You'll say he's innocent and he's free to go. Now why? What's the reasoning in that? My time, what's the reason? Kivan de Gemiri, because since we know traditionally the halacha is halanat din, we need the idea of sleeping overnight on psak, meaning if majority of the court wants to put him to death, they have to sleep overnight before they do the next day, in order that they could seek some sort of favor in this guy's position. But Vahani, in this case, where everybody only sees guilty, Tulo Chazule, they're no longer going to be able to see any sort of favor for this guy, so you won't be able to fulfill this idea of halana, of sleeping overnight, and the halanat din, and therefore, in such a scenario, if you can't fulfill that part of it, you have to acquit this guy. He has to go free of charge, innocent. Very interesting psak. Let's move on now to the second section. The Gemara tells us here certain qualifications, character traits that were necessary to be on the Sanhedrin. Now, it doesn't distinguish over here between the Sanhedrin Agdolah or Ktana of 71 or 23. It would appear that these are necessary for both levels. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Ein moshivin b'Sanhedrin, you cannot have as judges on the Sanhedrin, Ela ba'alei koma. First, they have to be tall. Why do they have to be tall? Very interesting. So Rashi learns this, and the next one also, is that people that have these character traits, the few that we're about to list, they place a certain natural awe or fear on others, and others will naturally respect them. Height. I think they have statistics that show people in positions of authority very often possess the height. That's one of the things, because naturally people have awe or respect for such people. For those of us who are 5'9", you know, we have to figure out how to instill awe in different ways. So the Gemara actually, the Gemara in Ta'anit also reflects this. The Gemara in Ta'anit says that they used to ask a certain Chacham to speak when it was the Ta'anit in order to inspire the people. And one of the characteristics that the Gemara says perhaps would be good for this would be someone that's tall. Similar idea. But, you know, you could have other character traits that inspire awe, but height is one of the character traits necessary to be on the Sanhedrin for that reason. Uba'alei chokhmah, or they also have to have wisdom, intelligence. Uba'alei mar'eh. Now, it's not clear what it means, ba'alei mar'eh. Rashi says it inspires awe. Again, it could be that they're very good looking, or maybe they have a certain countenance to them that is respected. Uba'alei zikna, somebody that is of a certain age. Aged. Someone that's very young doesn't inspire awe. Uba'alei kshafim, as well as somebody that's ba'alei kshafim. Now, what does that mean? So Rashi explains what ba'alei kshafim means, somebody that's acquainted with witchcraft. Why? Because, as Rashi explains here, they'll know how to prosecute people that have this ability of witchcraft, who are going to rely on their witchcraft to avoid the court, and they'll be able to reveal that and therefore incriminate these people if they need to be incriminated. Rashi also says they'll reveal the witchcraft of people that are attempting to convince, perhaps, or sway judgment with their witchcraft. So apparently, to be aware of witchcraft, it's important so that you can avoid the potential games that these wizards or witches will be able to do. And finally, v'yod'im b'shiv'im lashon, very interesting condition, which is they have to know the 70 languages. Rashi explains, and the Gemara says why? Shalota tehei Sanhedrin shomat mipia metorgeman, in order that the Sanhedrin does not have to listen to a translator. As Rashi explains here, part of the job of the Sanhedrin, in order for it to be a good witness, they have to hear it from the witnesses directly. Now, if they don't understand the languages the witnesses speak, so they'll have to hear it from a translator, which would be an issue of aid mipi aid. There's a rule, you can't hear it from a witness, meaning through a translator. So in order to avoid that issue, there have to be members, we'll see, on each Sanhedrin who understand the 70 languages, in order that they could understand directly from the witnesses. And we'll get into this a little bit later, exactly how many members have to fit that bill, because that's quite a significant thing. The Gemara in Megillah actually tells us that Mordechai, who was part of the Sanhedrin, was the one who knew 70 languages. Because of that, in the story of the Purim episode, where Bigtan and Teresh tried to assassinate the king, they spoke in Tarshish, or Torsi, as the Gemara calls it. He happened to understand that language. He understood that there was a plot to assassinate the king. He told that over to Esther, and this is the idea that he triggered the Geulah with this, which is, we learn from that, because he was from the Sanhedrin who understood 70 languages. Amar Rav Yehuda Marav. So Rav Yehuda Marav wants to elaborate on the wisdom someone has to be on the Sanhedrin. Ein moshivin b'Sanhedrin, you cannot have members of the Sanhedrin, these judges, unless it's somebody who could use his great analytical wisdom to purify a sheretz from the Torah. We know a sheretz is one of the 8 creatures that if it's dead and you touch its corpse, you're considered tameh. So if somebody has the wisdom to be able to deduce how we could counter to the halacha, but figure out how we can validate that it's not tameh, that it's tahor, using logic, that would be a person who could be on the Sanhedrin, because he has great analysis, he has great skills of pilpul. So Rav said after hearing this, Ani adon v'tarenu, I can make a kal v'chomer and I would be able to deduce how a sheretz would not convey tum'ah. Turning to Yedzayin Mudbet, he said like this, Uma nacha shememit, umarbet tum'ah, if regarding a snake, which it could bite somebody and kill them with venom, And then in doing so, it would increase tum'ah, because if a snake bites somebody and kills them, now that's a dead body that would be considered tameh. But tahor, but nonetheless, the halacha is that a snake itself, a dead snake, would not itself convey tum'ah, because it's not one of the shmona shratzim. It's not one of the 8 creepy crawlies that its corpse conveys tum'ah. So sheretz, regarding a sheretz, then the eight creepy crawlies, she'eno memit, which cannot kill people, umar bet tum'ah, assuming these things don't kill, and then increase tum'ah by killing somebody, eino din, so certainly she'eh tahor, its corpse should be tahor and not convey tum'ah. So Rav's saying the following kal vachomer, saying like this: if regarding a snake which has the ability to increase tum'ah in the world through killing somebody or an animal, because the corpse is then tameh, but its own corpse, the snake, is not able to be convey tum'ah, because the snake is not included in the shmona shratzim. Right. However, so then regarding the shmona shratzim, the 8 creepy crawlies, which can't kill somebody and in doing so proliferate tum'ah in the world, certainly their corpses shouldn't be allowed to convey tum'ah. Now this is not the halacha, but Rav was saying is, you see from kal vachomer I would deduce it, and therefore I could be on the Sanhedrin. But the Gemara says it's not a proof, because midi dehava kotz ba'alma. The refutation to this kal vachomer is a thorn, a general thorn. It means we know that a thorn, you can use a sharp thorn, chas v'shalom, it could kill somebody, or it could kill an animal, and it could proliferate tum'ah. But certainly a thorn itself is not tameh. So you see, just because it has the character trait of proliferating tum'ah by killing something else, it doesn't mean necessarily that it also could be considered tameh with its essential item. So therefore this kal vachomer is refuted. Yeah. Beautiful. Let's go ahead now. Now the Gemara focuses back on this idea of speaking 70 languages. We had said that in order to be on the Sanhedrin, 2371, you had to have spoken 70 languages. So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Yehuda Amar Rav says the following. Kol ir she'ein ba shnayim ledaber ve'echad l'shmoa. He says like this: you don't actually need all 23 members of the Sanhedrin Tana to speak 70 languages, but rather it's sufficient for 2 of the members to speak the 70 languages and 1 to understand the 70 languages. I mean, you have some people, they can't speak a language, but at least they could understand it. So Rav was saying, as long as you have 2 members of that Sanhedrin who could speak it, even if 1 other member could understand it, that would be sufficient. Ein meshivin ba Sanhedrin. So again, any city that does not have this qualification, ein meshivin ba Sanhedrin, you would not be allowed to establish in it a Sanhedrin. Means all you need is that 2 could speak and 1 could hear, understand it. That would be sufficient if you have that in regards to the recognition of the 70 languages. But less than that would not be sufficient. And the Gemara tells us, Uwe Beitar, in Beitar, havu shlosha, there were 3 people who could speak the 70 languages. Ubi Yavna, and in Yavna, Arba'ah, there were 4 who spoke the 70 languages. And who were they? Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Akiva, these 3 rabbis. The Shimon HaTimni dan lifneim bekarka. And Shimon HaTimni was the 4th one, but he was actually a student who sat on the ground in front of them. Rashi just points out, meaning it's the emphasis is he didn't receive smicha yet, but he also understood the 70 languages, so there was actually a total of 4. So everybody just wait 1 second, he just checked something. I'm just curious, because from the simple pshat in our Gemara, it seems like, in general, to be on either the 71-person Sanhedrin or the lower courts, you need these qualifications to speak the languages. But I want to see over there by Mordechai if it emphasized the distinction. It's at Gimel Amud Bet in Masechet Megillah, and the Gemara says, very interesting. Side point here, sorry, I just wanted to clarify this. The Gemara says in Gimel Amud Bet in Masechet Megillah that these two, Shnei Torsiim Havu, these Bigtan and Teresh, these were two people from Torsi or Tarshish, and they spoke in Lashon Torsi, and they said, Miyom sheba'ata zo lo ra'inu sheina be'einenu. So they wanted to kill the king, but they didn't know, Ki Mordechai mi yoshvei lishkat hagazit haya. Mordechai was from those who sat in the hewn chamber, meaning to say, he was part of the Sanhedrin Hagdolah. That's in the Beit HaMikdash. And he knew the 70 languages. Okay. Very interesting. So I see the ArtScroll footnote over here says that, meaning he overheard their conversation. Quotes the Gemara in Menachot 65a and Sanhedrin 17a, which is our sugya, that the knowledge of the 70 languages was essential to qualify as a member of the Sanhedrin. Okay, this is very interesting. The Gemara there seems to imply that's to qualify for the Sanhedrin Hagdolah, for the higher level of Sanhedrin. Our sugya does not make this distinction. And it seems from this clearly that we're talking about other cities. Beitar, Yavne, not sure. I mean, and also here, Rav Yudah Marav says, any city that doesn't have two to speak, or one that could understand, you can't make a Sanhedrin. That's talking about the 23-person Sanhedrin, clearly. So, very interesting. Okay, it's not clear. I'm going to leave this a little bit open. We have to work on this a little bit. It's not clear to me if these are qualifications, from the simple pshat in our sugya, these are qualifications that are necessary in general for the higher level Sanhedrin or the lower level capital courts of 23 as well. It could be, I'm just wondering now aloud here, maybe the Sanhedrin Hagdolah required, it's just a thought, I don't know if this is true necessarily, all of them to understand 70 languages, which is what Mordechai fell into, whereas in the lower courts of 23, as Rav Yudah Marav is saying, you just need a few of the members. In this case, he says you need two who could speak it and one who could understand it. Perhaps there is such a distinction. I do see the Ramos being quoted. Maybe we could take a look at that after, because that is very interesting. Let's continue. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Akiva, Shimon HaTimni, Dan Lefneim Bakarka. Meitev asks the Gemara Kashan Rav, so you're saying, in order to be a member of the Sanhedrin, to the lower courts of 23, you have to have two people in that court who could speak the 70 languages. Is that true? But the Braita says, Shlishit Chakama. If you have a Sanhedrin that has three who could speak the 70 languages, that's a wise Sanhedrin, but that's the bare minimum qualification. You need three, not two, who could speak the 70 languages. Revi'it ein l'ma'ala imena. And if you have four, there's nothing greater than, which means that's a tremendous thing. But the point is, you see, unlike Rav Yudah Marav, that you actually need three who could understand the 70 languages, not just two. So the Gemara answers, okay, it's a machloket tanaim, because Huda Amar ki haytana. Rav follows the following Braita. The Tanya, the Braita says, Shniya chakama shlishit ein l'ma'ala imena. The Braita says, even if you have two, it's considered a wise Sanhedrin, it's enough. And three would be, and there's nothing greater than that. So the point is, this would apparently be a machloket tanaim if two is the bare minimum. Two people who could speak the 70 languages, or three is the bare minimum, and Rav would follow that second shita of two and not three. Okay, now this third and final section will take us till the end of the day. The Gemara here is going to talk about how there's certain phrases and terminologies we use throughout Shas, like the people who spoke from here, and the Gemara is going to tell us who are these phrases actually referring to. So let's get started. Lemeid and lefnei chachamim, when it uses the language, those who studied in front of the Chachamim, this refers to Levi me Rebbe, when Levi used to study from Rebbe. So wherever it says that those who studied in front of the Chachamim said, it means Levi had studied from Rebbe. Danin lefnei Chachamim, those who judged or determined in front of the Chachamim, that refers to Shimon ben Azai, Shimon ben Zoma, Chanana Mitzri, Chanana ben Chachinai. these 4 people, whenever we say those who were danin lifnei chachamim, that's who it refers to. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak matni chamisha. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak added one more. He said there were 5 people included in this category. Who were they? Shimon, Shimon, v'Shimon. 3 Shimon. So 2 of them are the same. Shimon ben Azai and Shimon ben Zoma. But he also added Shimon Atimni. This is one he added. And Chanan v'Chananya, who were the same as the previous Shita. Rabotenu shebebavel. Whenever the Gemara says the rabbis of Bavel, that is Rav v'Shmuel, the great Rav and Shmuel of Bavel. Rabotenu shebe'eretz Yisrael. Whenever it says the rabbis of Eretz Yisrael, this refers to Rabbi Abba. Dayanei Gola. Whenever it says the judges of the exile, that's Karna. Dayanei Eretz Yisrael. The judges of Eretz Yisrael, that is Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi. Dayanei de Pumpadita. When it says the judges of Pumpadita, that Rav Papa bar Shmuel refers to Rav Papa bar Shmuel. Dayanei de Narda. Whenever it's the judges of Narda, this is an area in Bavel. Rav Ada bar Minyumi, it refers to Rav Ada bar Minyumi. Sabe de Surah, the elders of Surah. Rav Huna v'Rav Chizda refers to Rav Huna and Rav Chizda. Sabe de Pumpadita, if it's the elders of Pumpadita. Rav Yehuda v'Rav Eina refers to Rav Yehuda and Rav Eina. Charifi de Pumpadita, when it refers to the sharp ones of Pumpadita, that refers to Eifa v'Avimai b'nei Rachava. Refers to Eifa and Avimai, the sons of Rachava. Amorai de Pumpadita, when it refers to the Amorayim of Pumpadita, that's Rabba of Rav Yosef, the famous Rabba of Rav Yosef. Amorai de Nardoi Rav Chama, the Amorayim of Narda is Rav Chama. Nahar Balai Matnu, when it says Nahar Balai, the Nahar Balians taught, that's Rami bar Barabi, Rami the son of Barabi. And Amri Be Rav, when it says it was said in the Beit Midrash of Rav Huna. So Rav Huna was a major student of Rav, the primary student of Rav, so it refers to what Rav Huna said over. Says the Gemara, is that true? V'ha'amar Rav Huna, but Rav Huna says, Amri Be Rav. We do have times where it says, Rav Huna said that it was said in the Be Rav. So clearly, Amri Be Rav is not Rav Huna, because if it was, he would just say it, if it meant to be what he says. Ella Rav Hamnuna. Rather, it was Rav Hamnuna. So the Mefarshim explain that when it says Amri Be Rav in general, it could be Rav Huna. But if it's Rav Huna quoting Amri Be Rav, it means Rav Hamnuna, who was another student of Rav. Amri Be Marav, when the Gemara says it was said in the west, this is Rav Yirmiyah. Very interesting. That means in Eretz Yisrael, specifically Rav Yirmiyah who was talking. Shalchu mitam, when it says they sent from there, which means from Eretz Yisrael, Rav Yossi bar Chanina, this refers to Rav Yossi bar Chanina. When it says Machaku alav marav, that they laughed about this, or they scoffed at a certain pshat, that is in Marava, that's Rabbi Lazar, that refers to Rabbi Lazar. The Gemara says that can't be, because V'hashalchu mitam l'divrei Rav Yossi bar Chanina. The Gemara tells us that there was a certain member that was quoted as saying, they sent from there, that according to Rav Yossi bar Chanina, etc. Which means, if Shalchu mitam is Rav Yossi bar Chanina, so why was it highlighting that as a seemingly an outside opinion? Ela Epoch, the Gemara says, switch the last 2 around as follows. Shalchu mitam, when it says Shalchu mitam, they sent from Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Lazar. That's Rabbi Lazar who's sending it. Machaku ala b'marav, when it says that they scoffed on something in Marav, that's Rav Yossi bar Chanina, and therefore we could explain the previous statement that we mentioned before. Okay, we're going to stop here, 2 dots towards the bottom of Yud Zayin Amud Bet, about 12, 15 lines from the bottom of the page. We'll pick up tomorrow, Be'ezrat Hashem, the bottom of Yud Zayin Amud Bet, and actually Be'ezrat Hashem will finish the first parak of Sanhedrin tomorrow. And in the meantime, I wish everybody a wonderful day.